Hello, how's it going? Welcome into the Monday Mailbag. If you are watching this only on YouTube, you probably got it on Wednesday. Those of you that are on Patreon already, you saw this on Monday. So, hey, there's that. It's at certain tiers on our Patreon page. And also keep an eye out for our YouTube community membership channel perk stuff dropping pretty soon. I just got emojis and emoticons and loyalty badges and all that approved. Just got to set up the tiers. There will be 3 tiers. I'll talk about that more at the end, but you'll be able to contribute there. These questions are from people on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Patreon. Moving forward, these questions are only going to be from people in our YouTube community membership and our Patreon page. So if you'd like to get a question in and have it answered, join when the YouTube community membership thing drops, and I'll announce that. Then also you can just join us on Patreon, link in the description. And then if you want to get this video and all of our videos ahead of time, you can join us on Patreon or you can join us on the YouTube community membership page. All the same. So we'll get that rolling in a bit. For now, let's get into our mailbag. About 5 or 6 of you sent in questions. I won't have time to go through all of them. So I just picked out some of the ones that are different. Some of you asked the same question, so I try to ask or try to answer different ones here. And this is not one topic, one video. So sorry I can't spend 30 minutes on your particular question, but hopefully there's enough here where I do answer your question in some capacity. So Monday mailbag, can Michael Davis bounce back in 2022? That's a question we'll get into later on. But up first, on Twitter from Seamus O'Toole, who are your top 3 candidates to be the signature undrafted free agents that makes the roster? Now, we did do a video on this already. We did about an hour or so video on, or Alex, Steve, and I did a video where we took 4 or 5 of the undrafted free agents. There's 14 total, although one of them's a kicker. And we broke them down and power ranked them sort of based on who we thought was least likely to most likely to make the roster. And we all came up with different, we all had different players. So we all obviously had different rankings. You can check that out. So based on that, and the conversations that we had and what the guys were telling me about the guys that they watch, and based on the film study that I had and the guys that I watch, I think the most likely person or player position to make the roster, it's one of the running backs. I think it comes down to Letty Brown or Kevin Marks Jr. And the reason for that really is that the Chargers don't have to change their roster construction to fit one of these guys. Now, if they do change their roster construction from last year to this year, then yeah, they are maybe less likely. And it's one of the other position groups that gets a bump in the number of players they have on the roster. Maybe they're more likely. But based on how they constructed it last year, they kept 4 running backs. Whereas other positions like wide receiver or edge, they would have to make an additional spot appear this year. Is that possible? Absolutely. But I'm just looking at what they did last year and how they constructed their roster. It's more likely one of the running backs is going to make it, just because there's a good shot they can win one of the RB4 spots, whether that's over Kelly, whether that's over Roundtree, maybe over both. I don't know. But there's definitely a better shot there. Whereas some of the other guys I'll mention later on, they need some help just in roster construction to even make the roster. So to me, it does come down to Letty Brown or Kevin Marks Jr., the only true running backs that are there. Letty Brown does lead Kevin Marks Jr. in yards after contact average, missed tackles forced, breakaway rate, and yards per route run. Kevin Marks Jr. does lead him, though, in fumbles in a good way and pass blocking efficiency. So I haven't watched Kevin Marks Jr., so it's tough for me to say who's better on film. Steven believes that Kevin Marks Jr. does fit the room a little bit better. I personally do think, having watched Letty Brown, that his skill set is a bit redundant with what they have. Not that he's bad by any means, but if Kevin Marks Jr. is more of your scat back type, and again, I don't really know this, but based on what Steven was telling me and telling us in that video, it sounds like he's a better fit to make the roster over someone like Letty Brown, who may even just be a better running back, but he's a redundant fit, if that makes sense. And it is worth noting, as I already said, Kevin Marks Jr., 2 fumbles in 2021, which isn't great. Letty Brown, 5 of them, although Letty Brown did have twice as many carries, but still 5 fumbles from Letty Brown and a pass blocking efficiency of 95.5. I believe he allowed 2 sacks on the year. So if you fumble 5 times, you allow 2 sacks. Very, very tough to make the roster. Kevin Marks Jr., not a whole lot better, but it sounds like from what Steven said on film, he's a good pass protector, and that shows here with a 98.1 pass blocking efficiency. and also just a good run blocker here. They run a lot of two back sets. Sometimes he would lead for Jarrett Patterson or the other running back. So that is notable. So if you I do think Lady Brown looks, at least on paper, like the better running back. And even his profile, it's a more intriguing physical profile, height, explosion, whatnot. The only thing Marks really has over him, which is significant, is that 40-yard dash. But it's a 4.6 versus a 4.64. That's kind of, nitpicking at that point. Although there is a big difference in percentile, but still 4.6 versus 4.64. Letty Brown, I believe, leads him in most everything else, or except vertical. And to me, if the numbers are better and the physical profile is better, then I would lean towards Letty Brown. But having watched him, I feel it's redundant. I guess I have to watch Kevin Marks to figure out if he's really a unique enough skill set enough to fit there. So I do think one of these running backs ends up making it. And historically, you see guys like Brandon Oliver, Austin Eckler, Detrez Newsome. I'm sure there's more running backs that have made the initial 53-man roster at running back. I think there has to be 4 or 5 in Telesco's tenure, whereas a wide receiver is maybe one here or a linebacker there. Running back seems to be very consistent in making the roster for this team. And it's possible it happens again. Again, they can carry, if they carry 4 running backs like they did last year, one of these guys can definitely beat out Kelly or Roundtree for that 4th spot. Some people say that 3rd spot, personally, I think the 3 spots are locked up into their draft picks. I think it's obviously Eckler, Spiller, and then one of Roundtree or Kelly. And then that 4th spot is up for grabs. I think the first 3 spots are going to go to people that they drafted, but that's just up to me. Not saying it's just because they drafted him, but it's kind of a part of that equation as well. But yeah, it does come down to roster construction. So each of us took a number 1 guy. I took Ty Shelby, the edge from Louisiana Monroe. Alex took wide receiver Trevon Bradford. Steven took Kevin Marks Jr. Steven did not have Letty Brown to watch. That was me. So I don't know, maybe he would have watched Letty Brown and had him over Kevin Marks Jr., but he didn't. So he had Kevin Marks Jr. making it. So to me, Ty Shelby, like personally, I do think Ty Shelby should be the one that makes the roster. You don't need a 4th running back. You don't really need a 5th edge rusher either. But I would love to see the Chargers start developing more guys. And as everybody knows, they could kick Emeka Egbole off the roster as fast as they possibly can. Again, if you know, you know. If you don't, all good. Ty Shelby making it would be great because of the linebackers, or excuse me, the edge rushers that they have. Bosa can reduce inside, but Chris Rumpf can't, or at least he didn't last year. And I don't think he will be. Kyle Van Noy with the Patriots did not do that last year. If he reduced inside, it was as an inside linebacker, not as a 4-point stance rusher by any means. And then Khalil Mack, I suppose he could, but when you want that rotation, the guys behind them like Emeka Egbule, you want guys who can put their hand in the dirt maybe. Ty Shelby can do that, and he also would have, if he makes the team, he would have the longest arms on the team, which as we know, if you look at Otito Ogbonia, even Jerry Tillery, arm length is a big deal for Brandon Staley. So if I had to do a top 3, to me, it's one of the running backs or Ty Shelby. But I do like other guys. I like Cromanhuck, the tight end from USC. If they just had to keep 4 tight ends and a fullback, then he definitely has a shot as an H-back type. All right, next one comes to us from Andrew Romano from Patreon, who says, I saw someone say that they loved all the player acquisitions and draft, but still have doubts about Brandon Staley's coaching. I love Staley and his coaching staff, but what do you think about that? Yeah, it was definitely a journey last year for Chargers fans. I remember, we look at what happened in the draft last year, and they're waiting on safety, and we think, oh, maybe he believes he can get the most out of his day 3 guys. They waited to get Mark Webb. That was the first safety that they took when they knew they needed safety depth. But we figured, okay, Brandon Staley has a history of developing undrafted free agent, day 3 talent guys. So maybe Mark Webb, we're all good here. And I think when you have a coach like this with such a distinct plan, you trust them a little bit more because you feel like you know what they're doing because you can sort of see the plan that they have, but also the way Brandon Staley talks, you have to trust him because he just makes you feel good about these decisions. He sees the good in all the players and he makes us feel like, hey, you know what? Maybe that was a smart move. I didn't expect it, but you know what? I trust this coach. And then training camp happened, and there was a big divide. I went ahead and said that after Brandon Staley said Tillery had a phenomenal camp, I said no. Tillery has not had a phenomenal camp, and I could share plenty of tweets back at me like, well, maybe I'll just trust the defensive genius over here, the guru, the actual coach. Who are you? Yada yada. I'm not saying I know more than Brandon Staley. I don't. All I know is actually sitting there and objectively watching training camp and being there for most of the days and gathering all the stats across all of Daniel Popper's articles. Jerry Tillery did not have enough phenomenal training camp. He did not. And how'd that look on the field? You know? So again, it was a bit of a up and down because that was kind of the height. Everything's working. Training camp looks great. Mark Webb looks good, and then they start what 4-1, 5-1, or whatever it was, 4-1 to start the year, and everyone's pumped. Look at Staley. Look at this coach. The plan's amazing. The plan's amazing. No one talked about Joe Lombardi. No one talked about the fourth down decisions. Right then, things went poorly after after the bye week, and then things started to really change for the fans. And by the time we got to certain games, like let's say the Raiders game to the end of the year, people were really questioning Brandon Staley, whether that came down to Kenneth Murray playing significantly more snaps over Kaiser White, or the decision to go for it on fourth down, where they ran it to the left side up the middle and they didn't get it, and the Raiders kick a field goal, all that sorts of stuff. It started to weigh more on Chargers fans, and we went from the honeymoon phase to a very split fan base on Brandon Staley because things started off so well. And again, you listen to him speak and you believe everything he says, but then on the field they ended up going 9-8, and that's not all on him by any means. There's a lot of reasons they went 9-8, not just Brandon Staley, but I know fans were getting frustrated. So, Romano's asking here, Andrew Romano's asking, some people still have doubts about him. What do you think about this? And to me, it really comes down to one specific thing. The coaching, we'll see. I think part of what I'm going to say here will lean into the coaching on the field stuff. But the my biggest concern with the Staley regime, I won't even just say Brandon Staley, it's the personnel decisions, because Jerry Tillery's out there playing about 74% of the snaps, even though he on the entire year for the team, even though he missed a game due to COVID. That's still the fourth highest percent of snaps ahead of guys like Joey Bosa, Chen, and Mosu, which I get it. Those guys also, missed time or didn't play or rotate. But Jerry Tillery being, your number one front line guy, getting the most snaps there is not great because, I mean, I think we're all on the same page at this point where we know that he's not a good 3-down player. Maybe a pass rusher, maybe a rotational pass rusher, sure. But a run defender, no. And they went from putting Jerry Tillery out there more than anybody else on the front line and only behind the two safeties and Kaiser White on the entire defense. They went from that to not even picking up his fifth-year option. So we all knew something was off, but he was still out there. And I get that they didn't have the greatest depth, and some guys like Justin Jones were hurt, but there's no reason to not at least try out Fehoko more on first down, or shoot, even Joe Gaziano or something else. They just couldn't get him off the field. And, you can the other big divide between Chargers fans, I think, are people that believe in the conspiracy or whatever, that the ownership is forcing decisions, and Telesco is forcing first rounders to play. And I think there is definitely some of that in sports, and I think there's some of that with the Chargers. Certainly more in the past. I don't believe that's as much now, but still, these decisions, this defense, everything that happened on defense, at least I think, and I believe, based on what we've seen, what we know, what I know, Brandon Staley was the guy calling the shots on defense. If you don't like something that's happening on offense, then maybe that's a Joe Lombardi thing. But if you don't like what's happening on defense, that's all Brandon Staley, whether that's calls or personnel decisions, that's him. And people are split on that because they don't want to admit, again, honeymoon stage, people didn't want to admit that maybe he wasn't making the right decisions. But listen, this is his defense. We've seen that with the acquisitions even this year. You tell me now that Brandon Staley's not in full control of at least the defense, right? Come on, this is definitely his defense. So Jerry Tillery playing that many snaps, ridiculous. Kenneth Murray, the way they moved him around was disturbing, I guess. It was both confusing and disturbing because they made him a starter, which is fine, but then he was a not starter, which I guess is also fine. But then they moved him to edge, and that didn't work, and they didn't prepare him for edge at all. I didn't see him in training camp doing that. I don't believe in the preseason or at the scrimmage he was playing edge. suddenly they're saying, hey, oh, he's our edge. And then he doesn't do well there, and guys get healthy. And suddenly, oh wait, no, he's not our edge. Yep, no, he's our inside linebacker. But then he's not a starter inside linebacker. Oh, but now he's our dime linebacker over Kaiser White. It was just really unfair what they did to him there. So both putting him on the field too much, like that last game, we knowing full well that Kaiser White was the better linebacker, and then just overall what they did with him, moving him around, trying to make, a square peg going a round hole. It just wasn't working. And then finally, special teams. This isn't really under his control, but that's kind of the point. Brandon Staley allowed, I think, Darius Swinton to make decisions, roster decisions that affected not just the special teams, but the entire roster. It probably should have been Tyron Johnson and Austin Prohl making the roster, or at least one of those guys as a returner or as a receiver or whatever. As it turns out, KJ Hill makes the roster. And again, people say, oh, well, Telesco's forcing his 7th round draft pick on the team or whatever. Whatever. People can believe what they want. But to me, it just came down to poor, very poor personnel decisions from Swinton. And I think Staley let Swinton make those calls on the back end of the roster, and it hurt the team. Now, I do think Ficken is going to have that same control this year, but the difference is Swinton was not a special teams coordinator, if I'm not mistaken. He was always an assistant. And even if he were a special teams coordinator at any point, certainly not with these as many years as Ryan Ficken has had. So I trust Ficken to make these decisions more because he has a very true, proven track record. Swinton, again, if you watch the first 2 weeks of training camp, who were the most targeted players? Austin Pearl, Tyron Johnson, and both were cut in favor of KJ Hill, who maybe could have been a good receiver for them, but for his spot being primarily special teams, it was a disaster. And then they had Larry Roundtree at one point returning kicks, and that wasn't very good. And look where we are now. Darius Swinton was off the team. They let him go pretty quick. And it was just a problem on special teams very early on in the season. And I don't believe it cost them games early on, especially because they went 4-1, but it was costing them, points, field position, all that sort of stuff. And I just think Brandon Staley needs to have a better handle on these decisions because I don't think it's fair to even the offense. Again, Joe Lombardi dialing up deep shots to Tyron Johnson, getting Austin Prohl involved in yards after the catch, plays, gadget stuff. And then both were just cut, That's not fair to Herbert. That's not fair to Joe Lombardi. So I think those guys being cut was a problem for the offense. It's something that they sort of had to figure out during the year. They couldn't. We all wanted them to take a receiver for these reasons. Here we are. So I think Brandon Staley having better control over the active roster on special teams would be great. That would show me that a lot of changes. And then I just want to see some of these personnel decisions that he's made pan out. Eric Banks, Chris Harris, Kyler Fackrell, Devontae Harris, Esang Basie, Trey Marshall. I'm not saying these are all standout star players by any means, but I'd like to see those decisions. Now it's Khalil Mack and JC Jackson. I like to see them pan out more than, before, because these guys that he brought in or kept that Staley specifically wanted across the board, all of them failed to live up to expectations. Some of them, well, except maybe Eric Banks, who some of us had no expectations for, and he basically just did that. He did nothing. But, hey, Cortez Broughton, who needs him? The reasons to believe in him, though, on the flip side of the personnel decisions, is he does now finally basically have his entire roster. Not everyone is off the team. I'm sure, Alohi Gilman or Josh Kelly, those guys might be off the team at some point, maybe as early as this year. But he's mostly there with his own team now. JC Jackson, Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, Gerald Everett. I guess we're talking more defense here. But Kyle Van Noy, Bryce Callahan, all these guys, Troy Reader, it's really his image, or it's built in the image, not his image. It's built in the image that he wants. And certainly based on guys that fit his scheme, that he knows, all that. So moving forward with the free agents, with the 2 draft classes, I think we're starting to finally see Brandon Staley's roster, and I think we'll just see better results from that. And then finally, he can just play his preferred brand of defense. Now, if you're listening to this on the audio platform, I have this here as charts. I'll try to talk through it, but you can also, I think I did a different video for this as well. But with the Rams, Brandon Staley was very balanced. So the bluish bars, like blue-gray bars, indicate what the Rams ran. The black bars indicate the league average. And the Rams were very balanced in 2020 under Brandon Staley. They ran the three most personnel usage coverages, I guess. They ran the groupings that they ran where 2-3-6, 2-4-5, and 3-3-5. They were trying to go with 5 or 6 DBs on the field at all times. And that's circled in the red box here, or boxed in the red box here. Whereas you look at the 3-4-4, that base 3-4, they ran it far less than the league average because Brandon Staley doesn't want his linebackers on the field, at least not the inside linebackers. But you look to the Chargers, and things are skewed heavily towards a 2-4-5, right? And things aren't exactly, you know, balanced here. They had to really lean into that 2-4-5 because DBs were hurt. They had a bunch of linebackers, and they had to put those linebackers on the field. He didn't want to do that. And the 3-4, the base 3-4 was what 90 times. They ran about 90 times with the Rams. With the Chargers, what's that 250 or so times? 2-4-5 over 500 times. And you look at these groupings. You look at the Rams grouping. The 2-3-6 grouping does make it into one of their top 3 usages for the Rams. For the Chargers, there's no 6 DBs. There's no 6 DB groupings that make it into that top 3. Top 4 over here, but far less. The Rams ran a 3-4-4 or 2-4-5 about 385 times, and both of those were below the league average. The Chargers, 750, and both of those were above the league average. So now you have J.C. Jackson, Bryce Callahan, J.T. Woods, a healthy Mark Webb, Jasir Taylor, all that. It changes everything for Brandon Staley, I would think. They can now get back to what they wanted to do more, which is run a lot of that 2-3-6, that 3-3-5, try to get an inside linebacker off the field, switch it out for a DB, and play that lighter box. All right, the next question is from Bill Breland, who asks, how do you feel about Mike Davis this season after struggling last season being CB1? Do you think we see more of the 2020 versions since he'll be more CB2-3, or do you think he's just not a great fit for Staley's schemes? He's clearly a cut candidate if he doesn't play great this season. And yes, Michael Davis is a cut candidate after this year. The Chargers can save $7.4 million if they cut him with a $2 million dead money cap hit. His cap number overall is $9.4 million, so not bad. Not bad at all. And listen, if Asante Samuel Jr. gets hurt, pretty significantly or suffers another concussion, there's a world where Michael Davis has to be on the roster because Asante Samuel Jr.'s entire future could be in jeopardy. And I don't really if they restructure in some way, I don't hate his cap hit being under 10 million. He's not a bad defensive back by any means. And a guy who does know the system, who does have a lot of talent, who has shown he could be a good CB2/CB3, definitely a CB3. That's worth a lot, in my opinion. Now, the thing about Michael Davis, I think that we don't talk about much is the Ron Miles effect. I think from an undrafted free agent to 2020, you saw Michael Davis improve kind of year to year to year. Not that he's perfect by any means, but there was a point where he's shutting down Stephon Diggs, and that's under Ron Miles. Ron Miles leaves, and of course, there's also a scheme change, and things drop off for Michael Davis for most of the year. And I'm wondering how much Ron Miles really played an impact, how much he impacted what Michael Davis did on the field. Anyway, so the thing about Michael Davis is I do still think he can be a very good CB2. J.C. Jackson is obviously the CB1. I think, I guess you could say Asante Samuel Jr. and Michael Davis are battling it out. I do think Samuel Jr. ends up really with that starting job, and that seems to be the way it's going anyway. But Michael Davis can still be a very good CB2. When he's on the field as your CB2, I think he's very solid. And I don't think we remember what happened the entire year last year. I think we just remember the last 2/3, maybe the last half of the year where things weren't so great, but we don't remember how good he was to start the year. Weeks 1 through 5, he allowed a 58% completion rate, only 33.6 yards per game, and he even played 51 box snaps. So he was moving, covering tight ends. I believe he had 1 pass rush rep, if I'm not mistaken. He was moving around and being a real chess piece for Brandon Staley's defense. And in coverage versus Travis Kelce and Darren Waller, he was targeted 6 times and only allowed 3 receptions for 40 yards. And I believe those 40 yards were against Travis Kelce 0 yards allowed against Darren Waller. Everybody took turns covering Darren Waller. I don't think he was targeted at all. No, he had 1 target, but 0 receptions covering Darren Waller. That's pretty darn good. There's not a lot of guys, there's not a lot of CB1s who could do that, let alone Michael Davis as your CB2. Then things really went downhill. For whatever reason, in week 6, he was benched for Devon Campbell mid-game, which I think at the time we thought Devon Campbell earned more snaps, but not at the expense of benching Michael Davis, who just paid, $10 million a year to. But he was benched in the middle of that Ravens game. At the time, Davis only allowed 1 catch for 4 yards, and he had 4 tackles with 1 miss on the game. So I don't really know what happened there. But he was benched. Then they had the bye week, came out of the bye. He was the starter. Then he had a hamstring injury, and that really changed everything because he got hurt. I think he tried to come back, and things just weren't the same. Weeks 11 through 15, he went from 33.6 to start the year, and I think 1 touchdown allowed through those 5 weeks to 50.2 yards per game allowed and 4 touchdowns allowed over that span. And probably should have been 5 if Jamar Chase didn't throw the ball backwards into Michael Davis's lap. So much worse after that hamstring injury. And then COVID hit, and then week 17 or week 18 or whatever. Yeah, week 17 and 18, not great either. So you go from a guy who was about 58% of his passes his way were being completed, 33.6 yards per game, playing all over for the defense, only allowing 40 yards covering Travis Kelce and Darren Waller. Then suddenly he's benched, hamstring injury, COVID, everything goes downhill. Nothing is great. So to me, I do still think he can be a very good CB. It's just going to take his health, and maybe just being a CB2 or 3 will be better for him rather than that responsibility of having to be the guy every week. Now that is JC Jackson. Next question comes with me from Keith from YouTube. And he says, do you think our offense will perform better than last year, stay stagnant, or fall off? To me, let's look at this 2 different ways. I want to look at where they've improved just on paper on offense, and then what the real problem was for the offense last year. So I do think DeAndre Carter, as it is an improvement over Andre Roberts. Part of that was just Roberts' usage, but I also think Carter is more that true receiver, gadget guy. Roberts just seemed to not be involved in any way, could not find a way to be involved in the passing game at all. Carter last year had 385 total yards and 3 touchdowns. Roberts had 54 yards and 0 touchdowns. And I believe 25 of those yards were with a different team. So not great. Carter is definitely more involved for the Washington football team then, now Commanders. And I think he'll be more involved with this offense this year. And then you just have Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett being better than Jared Cook in yards after the catch per reception, missed middle of the field reception rate and drop rate will be huge. Jared Cook, the difference between Cook and Everett and middle of the field reception rate and drop rate was very significant. I think Everett was 2 or 3 times better than Cook. I think it was maybe not. I think it was like a 40% difference. Still very significant. Gerald Everett, much more sure hands over the middle. Justin Herbert had a hard time attacking the middle. Now you do have a guy who's younger with better hands, better after the catch to work over the middle of the field. I think that's going to be huge for Justin Herbert. And then finally, Ode Bushi was great, but he was hurt. Zion Johnson is going to be a significant upgrade over Michael Schofield. And then I have right tackle in question mark here because, maybe it's fixed. Maybe it's not. To be completely honest, I don't think it can get worse than last year. So that's good. How much better it'll get, I don't know. But the most important thing, which I know people are frustrated with the offense, but they were 5th in points per game, 5th in red zone touchdown percentage, 2nd in points per drive, and 2nd in drive success rate. They were awesome. The problems with the offense is they still couldn't score enough because the average offensive scoring margin for their games, even though they were 5th in points per game, 5th in red zone touchdown percentage, 2nd in points per drive, 2nd in drive success rate, their average offensive scoring margin was plus 0.9, which is 16th, right in the middle of the league. You have an offense that's basically top 3 in the NFL, and they went 9-8. And the offensive scoring margin was 0.9, despite the fact that they're one of the best offenses in the league. And that's because they had the 6th fewest drives in the NFL last year, and they were 18th in defensive takeaways. But now you bring on guys who can take the football away. You have JC Jackson with a 50 combined interceptions and passes broken up in 4 seasons. Khalil Mack had a career high 6 forced fumbles under Brandon Staley. He's now on the team. Joey Bosa just last year had a huge bump in career forced fumbles, or he had a career high in forced fumbles, that is, with another 6 under Brandon Staley. JT Woods led college football last year in interceptions with 6. And then Kyle Van Noy, as your third edge rusher, has 7 forced fumbles the last 3 seasons. He's going to, all these additions or these players on defense that they've added or developed or whatever, they're going to give the ball back to Justin Herbert more. Again, top 3 offense, one of the top 3 most efficient offenses in the league, including the run game, but still 6th fewest drives in the NFL, 18th in defensive takeaways. You bump those numbers up, this is a top offense in the league. Like what? And that was last year's offense without Carter, with a worse offensive line, with Jared Cook. Now they add some guys. They have a better line. It's second year, the first time Herbert's had a second year in the same offense since high school, if I'm not mistaken. You add these defensive guys who take the ball away, give the ball back to Justin Herbert, and the offense is just going to be better because they'll have more attempts. They'll average, I don't know, 0.5 points per game more or whatever, 1 more point per game. And that's going to bump them up from 5th to 3rd or whatever it is. Because, again, 2nd in points per drive, 2nd in drive success rate, but got to give him more drives, got to give Justin Herbert more opportunities. Last question here comes to us from Solo, who asks, do you think that JT Woods will develop quicker than Nasir Adderley? So I went back and looked at their stats. I did not watch Nasir Adderley back when he played in 2018 at Delaware, but I did want to look back and look at his stats. And across the board, now again, one of them is playing at Delaware, one of them is playing at Baylor, different roles, different responsibilities, I'm sure. But Nasir Adderley was ahead of JT Woods in every category: yards per reception, snaps per reception, missed tackle rate, forced incompletion rate, stop rate, average depth of tackle. I was really curious about the stop rate and average depth of tackle because JT Woods, triggering downhill as he does, I thought would have the better average depth of tackle. I thought that he would have maybe a higher run stop rate, but it turns out Adderley was better. But then again, one is Delaware, one is Baylor, FCS, FBS. So, but Adderley did have more stats, or better stats, excuse me. So the reason I think JT Woods does develop faster is because Nasir Adderley, like if we're just talking about years and games, Nasir Adderley only played 4 games with 0 starts in 2019 because he was injured in and out of the lineup. Rayshon Jenkins was there, and obviously Jervin James was there. I think that was the Jalen Watkins year. And they didn't really use Nasir Adderley. He was hurt. Only played 4 games with 0 starts. So that was almost a redshirt year. And then 2020 starts to develop in that Gus Bradley scheme. They dump Gus Bradley, and now they have Brandon Staley. So they have to switch things up, goes from that single high to a split coverage. And Adderley now has to switch from that cover 3 to cover 2. And things are different. He has to learn that again. And he looked great. I think he looked, or not great. I think he looked really solid. And I think he's going to be a really good player for the Chargers this year. Maybe even a great player. There's so many flashes of excellence. But, JT, if you're asking me who's developing faster, JT Woods is a clean slate. And he has a lot of the characteristics that Brandon Staley wants. He's very athletic. He's very smart on the field. He's also, the 5-time honor roll guy. So I do think that JT Woods will develop faster, and I think he's going to be their starter in 2023. I think Nasir Adderley is going to walk. I think JT Woods is going to start. And I think JT Woods, just based on what I think of him, his college film versus Nasir Adderley early in the league, JT Woods is a better, I know this is crazy, but he's a better tackler, I think, an attacker of the football near the line of scrimmage than Nasir Adderley. Yes, I know about the missed tackle rate of JT Woods. I pointed that out on the last page, but I do think JT Woods understands how to work downhill and attack the run game as a deep safety better than Nasir Adderley can, or did at least his first couple of seasons. Adderley's there now. I think JT Woods was already there the moment he stepped into the league. But again, we're talking about college production. Things change once you go to the NFL. Things are faster. Things are different. Maybe JT Woods will slow down, but we'll see. All right, last thing I want to talk about are channel memberships. Yes, we do have channel memberships. We're just trying to get that solidified at the very end here. We had to submit it to YouTube for review. That'll be up soon. But for our channel memberships, we will have access to our Discord. And yes, that Discord is already up and running. Patreon, if you're on Patreon, you already have it. If not, then it'll be up on our YouTube channel memberships pretty soon. And also, you can just go to our Patreon, which is in the link in the description. Early video access, loyalty badges, special membership emojis. We'll have members only chats, shout outs. Steven will do an OnlyFans. I'm kidding. Private streams, the Monday mailbag question submissions, and the early videos and all that. That will be there. So you guys will be able to get a whole lot of early stuff, new stuff, exclusive stuff. Some of it's specific to YouTube, obviously the loyalty badges and the emojis and whatnot, which I have, not me, but if outsourced and created. Those will be there for you guys, all that sort of stuff. So that should be fun. The Discord is particularly interesting because it's just the guilty as charged team. So you'll be able to chat with Kyle, with me, with Steven, Maddie, Alex, and we'll get an Arjun. Sorry, Arjun. Arjun's also on there. We each will probably have our own separate threads. I know Arjun right now is a very special, only him thread where he posts graphs for everybody to talk about stuff that he's working on. So you can check that out really early. We do have a source info section on there. So if you want to know who they were considering at 79 with JT Woods, which makes sense given who they ended up taking post draft in free agency, you can check that out there. Some stuff on the interior defensive line. Again, there's not a whole lot going on right now. The free agency and the draft already happened, but as we figure out stuff, we'll let you know in that portion of the Discord. So should be fun. All right, thank you guys for submitting in your questions. The next time you see this, it will be membership only questions, so Patreon or YouTube community memberships only questions, and it'll be early for those that are members, and then later, maybe like Wednesday, for those of you that are not members. All right, guys, take care, enjoy the rest of your week, and as always, bolt up.